Hello, everyone joining us this evening for Rain Garden Q&A. We'll get started in just a moment here. We're giving everyone a couple minutes to join the broadcast, and then we'll get started. And everyone, thanks so much for joining us this evening for Rain Garden Q&A. We'll get started in just a moment here. Let me go ahead and get started then, for real. Good evening, everyone. My name is Kelly, and I'm the Adult Programming Coordinator for Milwaukee Public Library. Thank you so much for joining us tonight. We're going to chat with Melinda about a rain garden Q&A. A little bit of housekeeping. On the bottom of your screen, you'll see there is a chat box. You can feel free to chat with each other. And please feel free to tell us where you're tuning in from. And then there's also a Q&A box on the bottom as well. If you have questions for Melinda, please add them in there and we'll have time to answer them. Also, I will be adding a link to the chat to Melinda's handout for this evening. We are recording this session, so that will be emailed out to you along with the handout, usually within a couple of days, and along with any additional information that we discussed this evening during our session. So without further ado, I'm very happy to hand it over to Melinda.
Thanks so much, Kelly, and thanks to those of you who sent questions in advance. And we will have time to answer your other questions. But I always find having a few things to discuss up front inspires others with their questions as well. And so if you've heard me speak before, you know I always like to thank our sponsors, Fresh Coast Guardians, a resource center for green growing ways to help manage water on your property, and Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, Partners for a Cleaner Environment. And they truly are really working at helping us all keep water on our property so it benefits the plants, goes to the groundwater after being cleaned through the soil and plant roots instead of overflowing our storm sewers. And for those of you from other parts of the country, thanks for joining us as well. Kelly and the Milwaukee Public Library, who hosts these events, making it easier for me. I get to speak and she has to handle the technical ends and help share the word with others as well. So the first question I had was, are mosquitoes a problem with rain gardens? And not a problem if they're properly done. Okay, so the idea of a rain garden is to capture runoff from the roof, the sidewalk, your lawn, hold it, but the goal is that it drains within 24, 48 hours at the most. So if you've got water standing longer than that, that's where a problem can occur. But it usually needs to be stagnant water for about a week for the mosquitoes to lay their eggs, the eggs to hatch, the larvae to breed, to pupate and become adults. So really, if your garden is properly planned and designed, it should not be a problem. But and also keep in mind that some of those critters that come and visit will help manage those mosquitoes, frogs and toads as well. And so that's one of the important things about how we select our plants, manage, but also avoiding the use of pesticides, which can be so difficult on those. So let's say it's not working. You're not getting that proper drainage, amending the soil, adding compost. And I'm going to talk a little bit more about that later when we talk about putting a rain garden in heavy clay soil. But adding compost is an amazing thing. It improves drainage in heavy clay soil, increases the water holding capacity in sandy, fast draining soils. And research out of Cornell found that plants growing in compost amended soil are much healthier, fewer pest problems, better growing environment, good soil bacteria, all the good kind of microorganisms that help feed the soil and our plants. It may be that If that's not the solution, it may be that your rain garden needs to be larger. Maybe you need a second one. If you're running two downspouts into one garden bed, it may be too much for that garden to handle. So you may need to have a second rain garden or enlarge this one, or maybe collect the water in a rain barrel from one downspout and then run it into the rain garden in the other. Planning for success. And we've done quite a few webinars, and they are still housed on the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel. So you might want to check out some of those as well. But talk about how to plan for success. And one of the first publications that came out on rain gardens was from Wisconsin. I'm very proud to say, as a Midwesterner, we're not known for being trendsetters, but I would travel all over the country. And 30 years ago, talking rain gardens and rain barrels. And a lot of people were surprised and not aware. And so it's really exciting that we are on the forefront, but we still have a lot to learn as we install our own rain gardens. But if you haven't taken a look at the Rain Garden Guide for Homeowners and Landscapers, there's a link on my handout. And Kelly put that link in the chat that you could click on and download, look at it. It doesn't cost anything, and it's stored on your computer so you could look at it as you're planning the process or visit regularly. You also want to, if you plan, design, and plant correctly, you'll minimize maintenance and increase your success. It's like any gardening, right? If you do other traditional gardening, perennial gardens or annual bed, you know that the more you do it, the more you become aware of what works and what doesn't. But it's all about soil preparation, plant selection, and proper care. And the same goes with a rain garden. Now, when you're designing that spot for your garden, make sure it's at least 6, preferably 10 feet away from the foundation of your house. The last thing you want is more water near the basement, right, or the foundation. And then no more than 30 feet. And the reason for that is the further from your house that water travels from the roof, the downspout through the swale, it's picking up more water as it reaches that rain garden. So the further away, the more water you need to manage. This is a huge rain garden. This is compliments of DNR. I appreciate their use of their picture. But you notice they're running 2 downspouts to this one garden bed. And again, the further away from the house, the bigger the garden is going to need to be to manage all that water. You want to keep your rain garden at least 2 feet away from walks and driveways, because if you dig right up to it, you're going to undermine, and that sidewalk could settle not the way you want it. And so you don't want to compromise the integrity of those hardscapes. So keep it at least 2 feet away. And then avoid areas where water ponds. Now, a lot of times people are like, well, doesn't that make sense? You'd put your rain garden there. No, you'll have a water feature instead, right? So you'll want to put that rain garden ahead of, so between the house and the areas where the water does pond, so you're intercepting some of that. And if it's still an issue, you may need to do something like a French drain where you dig down, um, put a weed barrier, some gravel, cover it with soil so that water is collected and can slowly drain. So the rain garden shouldn't be there. It should be ahead of that to minimize the water that collects there. You want to avoid your water lateral, right? If there's a leak or a problem, you're adding more water. By having the rain garden above it, you're putting more pressure on that water lateral. And if there needs to be something repaired, you don't want your garden dug up and destroyed. You also want to avoid trees, those tree roots. The majority of tree roots are in the top 12 to 18 inches, and we're going to be digging down fairly deep and we're going to be collecting water. So that area is going to have water standing for a while, slowly drain. It's going to be wet and dry. And those trees provide shade. They're great stormwater managers. And I'll talk about that in an upcoming webinar, the benefit of trees. So we want to keep away from, as far away as we can from those trees, so we minimize the disturbance to their roots. If possible, avoid steep slopes, because the steeper the slope, the digger the hole. And this is again from the Department of Natural Resources guide. But if you look at that you're going to want that area that we're collecting the water to be level, right? Because you want to intercept the water and it's going to pond. So you look at how steep that area is, you start digging. That's a lot of soil you're moving, and a lot of us have heavier soils, and that's a lot of work. So again, if you can avoid those steep areas, that's a great way. Or if you are going to put a rain garden there, you're going to just be digging deeper. So just be aware of it. Invite some friends over, get out the shovels, and be prepared to do some digging. Now, some people will install a retaining wall to deal with that steep slope. So instead of trying to dig a hole the whole way, creating that retaining wall to create that flat space. So they're not moving soil in as large of an area. But notice the downspouts dug buried underground and then gives moves out into that rain garden. Sorry. You'll need a bigger berm too, right? Because that water is going to be moving quickly, and you're going to need a berm anyway when you do your rain garden, right? Because you're collecting water. And if we have a heavy rain, and last year was a great example for many of us, we had a lot of heavy rain. In fact, there's been some research showing that if you can find maps of increased heavy precipitation just in our area, in the Great Lakes area, it was increased by 37% more heavy precipitation experiences happening. So we're getting a lot of heavy rainfall. That means your rain garden is going to be working hard. And if it overflows, that berm not only will help capture the water, but if it overflows, it will slow it down so it has a better chance of being absorbed by your lawn before reaching the storm sewer. Now, if you're in the city of Milwaukee, this doesn't apply to you, but some of you may live out in the country with a septic and a well, and so you want to keep your rain garden away from those as well. 5 feet from your septic, you don't need any more water pressure on your septic system, and 8 feet from your well. And then always call 811 anywhere in the country. In Wisconsin, you can also file online at diggershotline.com. And the idea here is we don't want to put our rain garden on top of utilities. One is they're not always that deep. Two, if there's some work that needs to be done, again, they'll have to remove your rain garden. You've put a lot of work into it. And then two, soil can settle, changes in buildings and grade can happen. So that utility may be much closer to the surface than it's supposed to be. And remember, we're digging down, amending the soil, planting. So call 811. In Wisconsin, it's at least 3 business days before you put the first shovel in the ground because you don't want to have to redo the work. Now, that's only public utilities. If you have an electric line running from your house to the garage, they're not going to mark that, but you want to avoid that as well. Or you have a propane tank that you've got on your property. Again, you need to know where those lines are. You have irrigation in your landscape or an electric fence, invisible fence for your dog. Those are your responsibility to know where those are and avoid those as well. One of the questions I had was how do I know how big to make my rain garden? I found this really cool rain garden calculator and you plug in and there's a link to this. So you plug in how big of a roof area you're trying to divert water from that portion of your roof to a rain garden. And then they talk about your soil type. Is it clay? Is it sand? Is it loam? And then how big is the slope? And this is all part of that Wisconsin Department of Natural Resources guide. But instead of you doing the math, they're going to do the math for you. So you plug in those numbers. So typically in a house, if you've got a rectangular roof, you've probably got downspouts on the corners, maybe in the middle. So those are designed to take, half of that, like a quarter of the roof off. Keep in mind that when we have an inch of rain, and an inch of rain covering 1,000 square feet of roof generates 623 gallons of water. And that figure is often used when we talk rain barrels, but it's something to keep in mind for your rain garden as well. I was so excited when I saw this because when I taught horticulture at Milwaukee Area Technical College and I'd start putting math on the board, I could see those glazed looks. And so this is a great tool to help you calculate how big of a rain garden you need. Now, in general, 100 to 300 square feet is a good starting point from a maintenance standpoint because you saw that huge garden before. And if you are a gardener already, you know that takes work not only to fix the soil and plant, but to weed and to water and to maintain to get it established. So, looking at a smaller size, and that may mean you only take one downspout into that garden bed and you find other ways to manage that storm water as well. So think in mind not only how much can you put in there. Kelly and I were talking that as gardeners, we get excited. It's spring, it's planting, putting those plants in. That's the exciting part of gardening, right? June, July come, the heat comes, the mosquitoes come, your whole family and friends disappear, and you're in there weeding. And so you want to not only think about how much time and money it'll take to install, but who's going to maintain it? Do you have help or is it up to you? And how does it fit into your schedule? Another question I received is, can you do a rain garden in heavy clay soil? Yes, you can. Milwaukee, the Fresh Coast Guardians have worked with many residents in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, many of whom have heavy clay soil. And so it is possible, but it does mean a little more work on your part. So, is it really clay soil? You can have a soil test and they'll analyze the texture, but you can also do this simple test. Dig down, take a handful of soil, rub it between your forefinger and thumb. And if it creates a ribbon like this that's 2 inches or more, you have a high percent of clay. I lived in the city of Milwaukee for quite a while, mended my soil, and I had a fair amount of clay. Now I'm out from further away from where I used to live, and I have sand. And so when I ribbon my soil, it's very gritty. My soil drains much quicker. So compost will help me hold the moisture, but it also will improve drainage for heavy soils. So we want to calculate, so how fast will our soil drain? So you might have some clay, which is beneficial when we have a droughty year, but too much can be a problem. So test the drainage when starting a garden, especially a rain garden. Dig a hole a foot deep and a foot wide. Okay, we're going to fill that with water and then we're going to let it drain. So we're thoroughly moistening the soil. Then we're going to refill the hole. And as that water drains, we're going to measure that drop every 15 minutes or at least a couple times just to get a feel for it. Multiply that 15-minute change. So let's say it drained, you know, an inch in 15 minutes times four, that's 4 inches in an hour. So if it drains 1 to 3 inches per hour, it's ideal. So that's great. You're in good shape to get started. If it drains less than an inch per hour, you've got poor drainage. So you're going to have to do some special things when creating your rain garden. If it drains even faster, you're going to probably want to add compost just to hold the moisture so you don't have to water your rain garden when we get dry weather. So again, amending the soil. I know I keep talking about it, but if you are a gardener, you know soil is the key to success. It's not the pretty part of gardening. It's not the things we drag our friends to the garden to look at. Oh, look at my great soil. Though I know a few gardeners like that, and I can appreciate it. We're usually there, look at this pretty plant. Look at this. Here are the birds visiting. Here are the butterflies. So investing time up front, and this is where it's okay to ask for help. I've helped do a couple of rain gardens, and having extra hands is great. Maybe you and your neighbors team up and you decide, okay, we're all going to do rain gardens. So this weekend we'll do mine, then the next weekend we'll do yours. And then by working as a team, you're going to accomplish it in less time, less stress. But the other thing, it's a great way to be social. Having help doing a round robin of installing and maintaining gardens is a great way to be social and accomplish some things. You also need to dig deeper if you've got heavy clay soil, right? Because you're going to capture it. And that enters into that how big does your rain garden need to be and how deep does it have to be? And that's in that DNR publication. Because remember that clay soil is going to drain slower. So we want to be able to capture more, allow it the time to drain. So keep that in mind. So the best plants for the rain garden, that was another question. How do I know? And one of the things that in any gardening, we all make mistakes with our plant selection. We get excited. I have plants I've got to move. Some plants I put in, I'm like, what was I thinking. Some of them didn't make them, some of them did too well and they needed to be moved. And I have a lot of dividing on my list for this spring, and I have a lot of space. I just sometimes get overly excited, especially those first few trips to the garden center. So, with rain gardens, a couple things to keep in mind. Height is one thing. If you're in an urban area, I was talking to a gardening friend who just said, "Oh, my plants are taller than the snow piles in winter, and I worry about my neighbors being able to see past my plants when they're pulling out of their driveway." So height is one issue. One, so you can see out, but two, visibility. Visibility for your neighbors, visibility for traffic if you're on a corner, and making sure you're being a good neighbor, but also not creating a nightmare for you. Also, plants that aren't going to be overly aggressive. And of course, for rain gardens, we want plants that tolerate flooding and drought because we're going to have periods of wet. So obviously, they're going to need to tolerate that. But in between the rain, it's going to be dry. And we want to have plants that can go through some periods of drought. Make sure that plant is hardy. That's kind of basic gardening, right? Does it tolerate the summer, the year-round temperatures? Does it receive the sunlight it needs? Most full sun plants need 6, preferably 8 hours or more of sunlight. If you've got a west facing location, that's often enough even for those full sun plants getting it. I mentioned avoiding overly aggressive plants. I love cup plant, but you know what? It's very aggressive. Look at this. And it's called cup plant because the water collects where the leaves attach to the stem and birds will come and sip the water and pollinators. So it's a very cool plant. It gets very tall. So it's over 6 feet tall and it spreads aggressively. And so not everyone has room for some of these plants that we love, but they're just too tall or too aggressive. So I thought I'd pick out just a few of the non-aggressive rain garden plants. On your handout is a link to the webinar I did a few weeks ago, teamed up again with Fresh Coast Guardians, MMSD, and the library on how to select rain garden plants. So there's a lot more detail and a lot more plants covered. But I picked out a few of those that I consider non-aggressive that might be good for your rain garden. This is a picture in one of my gardens, not a rain garden, but it's one of my favorite native plants, prairie smoke. It's a great ground cover, great edging plant. It only grows, like 6 inches tall, so perfect on the edge. You can see the flowers, and then when they mature, it has that smoky looking seed heads. Blooms early in the season, so it's a great way to start the season. It will take wet and dry soil. It might be a good one on the edge or even the berm. I have sandy soil, and this thing does great with minimal care. It slowly spreads, but I started dividing last year and they've been in there for 10 years, so not overly aggressive. These are all full sun plants I'm starting with. Then we'll go to full to part sun and then we'll go to shade tolerant. Purple prairie clover is a fun one. Look at those funky flowers. Great pollinator plant. Look at the foliage. It's nice and ferny and dissected. So even when it's not blooming, only a couple feet tall, blooms July and August, so mid to late summer. We're going from the shortest plants to the tallest in each light category, if that helps. And this information is on your handout too. And these will take dry soil. They have a deep tap root. They're nitrogen fixers. They're in the legume family, so they do a lot of good things for the soil. And their taproot, put them where you want to keep them if possible, because they're a little challenging to divide. Purple love grass, that's another good one near the edge of your garden. Only gets a couple feet tall. It blooms midsummer into fall. It's a long blooming plant. It likes it dry. Now, I have to tell you, I've got this in a couple garden beds, and before it blooms, it's kind of like, well, looks like kind of a grass weed. But then it bursts full of flowers and it's gorgeous. So that kind of awkward stage early in the season is well worth the wait. But I always like to warn people because you might go, is that a weed or is that a plant? It's definitely a plant worth keeping. Now, if you've grown asters like New England asters, you know that they can be kind of aggressive in the garden. Sky blue aster only gets 2 to 3 feet tall and is not really that aggressive in the garden. So it's not one that's going to take a ton of effort to keep it under control. Asters are great because they bloom late in the season, so it's great food. Pollen for our pollinators are late season visitors. And a good thing for you, right? A little color at the end of the season. And they'll take it dry as well. Now we're all trying to support the monarchs, right? And common milkweed is their favorite, but common milkweed has a deep rhizome. It spreads aggressively, hard to manage. The seeds, you could just cut the pods off before they open. But boy, I'm trying to corral the common milkweed on my property and it's winning. And so if you especially if you have a small landscape, consider doing butterfly weed. It's a type of milkweed. All the milkweeds attract hummingbirds, butterflies, and bees, and they are food for the monarch caterpillar. Butterfly weed likes well-drained, full sun, well-drained to dry soil, so good on the edges of your rain garden. And it's a shorter plant, 2 to 3 feet tall, so a good height. And it tends to be a clumper. It doesn't tend to spread. It's late to emerge in the season in the spring. So mark its location or just be aware. You know, I like to leave my things stand and I leave my butterfly weed stem stand until new growth appears, and I'm sure the pollinators have left any of those hollow stems because I want to make sure I don't accidentally weed it out. Good for dry soil conditions. If you have sandy soil like I do, works great. If you have heavy clay soil, there is a cultivar called clay that the owner of Prairie Nurseries discovered growing naturally. It's a naturally occurring variety that he found to be much more tolerant of clay soil. Side oats grama. Look at those, the seed heads. They sometimes call this eyelash plant because they look like little eyelashes off the stem. It's a 2 to 3 foot tall plant. It doesn't spread, it's a slow spreading clump. It doesn't take over the garden, not aggressive from a rhizome or seed standpoint. It's a late summer into fall bloomer and it will take it dry. So another good dry tolerant plant. Hoary vervain. I'm going to show you two vervains. And hoary vervain is the name. I think of hoary, I think of hairy, and I think hairy plants tend to be more drought tolerant. Now we're getting a little taller, 2 to 4 feet tall, especially if you have conditions where they're getting plenty of moisture. If you were in an area that had double the normal rainfall last summer, I know my plants were a lot bigger than normal with all that moisture. So anywhere from 2 to 4 feet tall. Midsummer into fall, so it's a long season bloomer. It is a clumper, so it won't take over the garden. Hoary vervain takes it dry. Blue false indigo. This is another one of my favorite plants. Look at those leaves. They're very pretty, almost have a bluish cast, which you can't really see in this picture. Look at the beautiful flowers on that. You can tell it's a pea relative, right? So it fixes nitrogen, has a deep taproot. It can be a little challenging to divide, and it is a big plant, 3 to 5 feet tall. I put this in front of our shop window and my significant other's like, "Do you think we could trim that plant? I can't see out of my window." And I thought he was just complaining. And I went and sat in his office chair and looked out the window. And sure enough, I needed to once I said, "Can we just let it bloom and then I'll cut them back?" And so we don't get to see the seed pods in this planting. I have it in other areas, but it kind of keep in mind it does get to be big and it does spread. It's almost the size of a shrub, a medium-sized shrub. Early bloomer, so you could start the season out. And as I mentioned, you can trim it back. If it tends to be floppy, you can cut it back by a third, but you'll lose those black seed pods, which I think are very attractive. And so it takes it moist to well drained. That deep taproot makes it very drought tolerant. Another milkweed you might consider if you want something taller and also for the wet as well as dry parts of your rain garden is swamp, often called red milkweed. And so it is 3 to 5 feet tall. So it's much taller than butterfly weed, but it's probably comparable to your common milkweed. Both have fragrant pink flowers as well. This one blooms June and July, so it's a long season of bloom. And it does not spread as aggressively. It takes it wet, but it also tolerate those dry periods. Now here's that blue vervain. This is the moisture loving vervain. So if you have heavier soil, or you could use this in the wetter parts of your rain garden. But it is a tall one, 3 to 6 feet tall, but it is a clumper, not aggressive. Again, blooming midsummer into fall. And this is the one that takes it wet. But look at those beautiful kind of lavender flowers, very, you can see appealing to hummingbirds, butterflies, and other pollinators. Now, don't let the name mint in this common name fool you. This one is not overly aggressive like many of our mint plants can be. It may even remind you a little bit of bee balm, the way those flowers are arranged. But downy wood mint is really not overly aggressive, full to part sun, great pollinator plant. You can see it is in the mint family. It has those fragrant leaves that have, rub on them and they smell good, and great pollinator appeal. This one's 1 to 2 feet tall, so we're starting out shorter, going to taller plants in the full sun to part sun conditions. This is a June and July early summer bloomer, and this takes it drought. It's drought tolerant. Lead plant is one of my favorites, but you need to be patient. Leave it standing. Don't cut it back the first few years. It develops a somewhat woody stem and it needs that time to get established. One, to establish a good robust root system, but also to begin flowering. Look at those leaves. Even without the blooms, it's very attractive, adding that nice ferny texture to the garden. So this is a couple feet tall, blooming again that early to midsummer time frame, and it takes it dry. Great blue lobelia. I included this. It will form colonies, but it's easier to manage than some plants. I find it slowly spreads, so you usually can keep on top of it. But the reason I wanted to include it is I find it much easier to grow than cardinal flower. Now, I'm going to say that, and some of you might go, I have tons of cardinal flowers. I was giving a talk somewhere and somebody said, "Oh, I got seedlings. Anybody need them?" And everybody else in the room was like, "Mine are dead." So cardinal flower is a great hummingbird plant with the red flowers. Great blue lobelia has great hummingbird appeal. Blue flowers blooms a little bit later in the season, 1 to 4 feet tall. I find it a good, usually 2 to 3 feet, depending on your soil and the moisture. Like cardinal flower, midsummer into fall bloomer, and this one takes it wet as well. But it will form colonies, but slowly. So it's easy to manage and a little bit easier to grow for most gardeners. A native shrub, New Jersey tea. Wonderful plant. First time I saw this was in Nicolet National Forest. So it takes sun to part sun, even a fair amount of shade. It's 2 to 3 feet tall. It's a woody plant. It is a shrub. Okay, so keep that in mind. It blooms midsummer into the early August, and it will take it moist, well drained to dry soil. The flowers are fragrant, and as you can see, great hummingbird bee and pollinator appeal, but also the seeds are eaten by many of the songbirds, and they eat the bugs that come and visit the New Jersey tea. Prairie dropseed is, I find, one of the easiest native grasses to use in a garden. If you look at this, if you know fountain grass, and that is a popular plant in many formal gardens, but this is a hardy native plant, fine foliage. It's kind of that nice, same growth habit as fountain grass, if you know that plant. What's good about this is it's got multiple seasons of beauty. So you've got that fine foliage throughout the growing season, flowers that smell like coriander, I think burnt popcorn, and then it forms seed pods. When they're covered with ice, they look like little gems, and fall color. So you've got multiple seasons of beauty on this 2 to 3 foot tall and wide plant. Give it room so you can really see the beautiful form. Again, it blooms later in the season and it takes it dry. I've used this in informal gardens, natural settings, and rain gardens. It's a great plant to consider. This is another one of my favorites. This is lavender hyssop. Now, some people have told me it reseeds too much for them. I haven't found that to be a problem, but the reason I included it, this is in one of my garden beds, and this does not, once my plants are established, I don't do a whole lot of watering, so they're kind of on their own, unless we have a really extended dry period once they're established. But look at all those silver spotted skippers. You might see a few bees on there as well. I was taking some video and pictures, and the bees and the butterflies, there were some swallowtail butterflies as well. And there was a couple hummingbirds that would come and nectar on the flowers. And I'm in the middle of this planting and they didn't care. It was great to see all that activity. Rub the leaves, they smell like anise. So sometimes it's called anise hyssop or even hummingbird hyssop because of the hummingbird appeal. Full to part sun, moist, well drained soil. This is 2 to 4 feet tall. Mine are in sandy soil. They're about 2 to 3. Summer into fall, long blooming. I do not deadhead my plants, and I have several months of flowers on this, and it will take it moist, well drained to dry. So now we're moving into just a couple shade tolerant plants. If you know sedges, there are sedges that take sun, sedges that take shade, some that like it moist, some that tolerate it dry. I kind of like the flowers and the seed heads on this Plains oval sedge. Very unique, yet kind of a nice, interesting texture. Full sun to full shade, and the birds like the seeds on this. This is a tall one though, 3 to 5 feet tall, so place it carefully. Blooms early in the season. You may not like it, but you might want to leave the seeds on there for the birds and cut it back once they're all dry and the birds have taken care of it. This will take it wet and it will take it dry. So it's a very diverse, it's very tolerates diverse conditions, sun to shade, wet to dry. So it's a good, tough plant. Now, if you've grown our native columbine, you're thinking it reseeds readily, and yes, it does. And I debated whether to include this, but it has such great hummingbird appeal early in the season, and butterfly provides nectar. Those spurs are filled with nectar that bring the pollinators and hummingbirds to your garden. Yeah, I've had a garden bed where I had to start weeding out all the seedlings because it was taking over. And so just keep that in mind. But what you could easily do, well, more easily do if you don't want to dig out the seedlings, is after the flowers fade, cut it back, not the whole plant, but remove those flowers, faded flowers before they produce seeds, and that takes care of the issue. So full sun to shade, birds eating the seeds, hummingbirds eating the nectaring on the plant, as well as pollinator and bees. And this is a spring bloomer. So as the hummingbirds are coming up into the Midwest and the North, those of you near the Gulf are already experiencing those migrations. This is a great plant to help them. It will take moist, well drained, but once established is fairly drought tolerant. Mountain mint, this is another one that's not overly aggressive and it attracts a wide range of pollinators and has these really funky flowers, right? And so it's definitely worth kind of adding some interesting texture and that kind of chartreuse flower color with the white florets on the outer edge of that inflorescent just adds to its interest and its appeal. Again, this is a full to part and actually you can push, and I'm not sorry, I kind of got this one out of the mix, 2 to 3 feet tall on this one. Not quite as shade tolerant as some. Blooms midsummer into fall, wet soil tolerant. So a couple to keep in mind. If you are in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, you can shop for and buy rain garden plants, and the sale's good till April 3rd or while supplies last. I was just on this morning. They are still taking orders. They do have a minimum size, and the idea is to keep the cost down. They really need people to buy a certain amount. It's like $45, but you really need a certain number of plants to have an impact as a rain garden to create a rain garden. But if you can't afford that or you're just looking to fill in those voids, maybe team up with a neighbor who's also looking to invest in plants. But a couple reasons it's a great thing. They want you to do rain gardens, so we manage our stormwater, but a lot of these plants are a little difficult to find at garden centers. I think as we build the demand, they'll be more readily available, and they're offering them at a discount to encourage you to grow more plants. Okay, so yes, rain gardens take maintenance. We are kind of guilty of saying, grow natives, have a rain garden. They're low maintenance gardens. Yes and no. Every garden requires maintenance. You know that if you're a gardener. And so I want to be really upfront and honest. All the things we talked about, the right site, the soil preparation. Water is important the first 2 years to get those roots established. Water often enough to keep the soil around the root system moist. So, depending on the type of soil, how much compost you added, and how hot it is, you may be watering a couple times a week. Gradually extend the time between watering as those plants start developing a more robust root system. Eventually, once those plants are established, you're very seldom are you going to have to water. Now, if we have an extended dry period, I'm originally from Ohio, and talking to some of the gardeners down there, they had 5 inches of rain in parts of Ohio the whole summer. So their rain gardens did better than some of their gardens, but really those moisture lovers benefited from a little supplemental watering. Weeding doesn't matter what kind of garden, weeds are ever present. Our soils have a load of weed seeds. When we bring in plants, sometimes when we bring in compost, other soil amendments, that's always a possibility. Weeding early, you get to know what your weeds look like. They're easier to pull. Getting rid of them before they set seed means fewer weeds to pull in the future. And if you do it early in the season, there's all that sunlight reaching the soil before our main plants fill in and shade out the competition. So that's really when the weeds are very active. So getting out there early and getting out there frequently. Now, one of the big questions I get on any gardening, is it a weed or is it a flower? And a couple people emailing about, well, I got the picture when it's in bloom, but it comes up and they all look alike. And that is very true. When we were putting in a rain garden, I was working with the folks from Fresh Coast Guardians, and Chris said, you know what? I always take a picture of that plant by the tag. What a great idea. So now you have a reference. Here are the leaves of that perennial. So now you know, okay, I'm watching out for those weeds, and that's a good clue that it's a keeper. And I know this is a common problem because people bring me baggies every year. Is it a weed or is it a flower? So that's a good starting point. Also, one of my favorite books, it's a reference. It can be overwhelming, but he has great pictures. And Kelly and I have talked about this book before, and I know the libraries have it. It's The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants by Neil Diboll, Diboll, and Hilary Cox. The Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants. And in this book, and it took him years to do because he was taking photos of all stages of the plant. So you could look up the plant you're growing and see pictures of that plant from when the seed emerges, when it's young, when it's a mature plant coming up, an established plant, what it looks like in flower, and the seed heads. So that's a great reference. And you could check it out of the library. You may end up finding that it's a good reference for you to use. And he also has lists in back about good prairie plants for urban settings, for rain gardens, for a variety of situations, but a great reference. And there are some online references as well. And while you're weeding, look for those invasive plants. Hopefully, you don't recognize garlic mustard, but it is a problem weed. And it's a problem because it reseeds, and one plant distributes thousands of seeds. Those seeds can last up to 7 years or longer in the soil. And so if we pull them out before they set seed, before they flower, it's a biennial. They don't have a chance to flower and set seed. If they've started to bloom, you definitely want to dispose of it properly because they will continue to form seeds. Invasive plants and also those aggressive ones, the sooner you take them out, the better. When you're cutting your grass, shoot the debris away from your rain garden. Um, if you're growing a rain garden, chances are you may not be using a lot of herbicides on your lawn, which is great, but you may have some weeds. I know I do in my grassy areas. And so shoot it away from your garden beds, especially your rain gardens. You'll have fewer weeds to pull. And then mulch, 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 mulch. It's great for the garden. Use something, I like shredded mulch because it kind of knits together, holds together. So when it rains, it won't float away. But until those plants get established and fill in the area, so the first few years, you may be mulching just to suppress the weeds, conserve moisture. And as they break down, they're going to improve the soil even more. And then fertilization at planting Have a soil test. It's always good to tell you what, if anything, you need to use. I'm a fan of Milorganite, as many of you know, and it's low nitrogen, slow release, promotes balanced growth above and below ground. Organic mulch or organic fertilizers, if you opt not to use a Milorganite, are good places because Milorganite has 85% organic matter. Organic fertilizers feed the soil as well as your plants. And then thinning and replacing. So, spring is a great time to dig and divide, especially those plants that flower in the summer and fall, or those that have outgrown their spot or taking over the garden. Things that aren't doing well. We all put plants in and they don't thrive where we plant them. Either move them to a new location, share them with a friend if you don't have jumping worms, or maybe you just add them to the compost pile. I know it's hard to do, but I've seen too many gardens where there's one plant that took over everything. And removing debris. So if your gutters have leaves and if they don't clog the gutters, which you want to make sure you clean those out, they go in the downspout, come in your rain garden, they can block the swale. So removing debris from the swale from any of the areas of the garden that may prevent water flow. That's important to do. Don't pile snow. You'll have snow in your rain garden, that's for sure, but don't shovel and pile it in there. And don't put any snow that's been treated with de-icing salt from your walk or the drive into your rain garden because that can interfere with plant growth. Almost done here. The question came about managing cattails, and I put a link into the DNR section. But I had to do a little follow-up. Digging them is the best bet, but if you've got a lot of them, it's really hard because their rhizomes of the invasive cattails can be overwhelming. If you opt to use an herbicide, I contacted the Department of Natural Resources because when we use herbicides, weed killers around water, wetlands, shorelands, aquatic garden features, we need to use an aquatic herbicide. I talked to DNR, at least in Wisconsin, they felt with a rain garden situation, at least in a home situation, you wouldn't need an aquatic pesticide applicators permit to do that. Cutting them back, treating the cut stems with that herbicide will minimize the amount of herbicide you put and reduce the risk to the other plants in the area. If possible, dig. We want to use few chemicals in our rain gardens because we're trying to clean the rainwater before it goes to the groundwater. But I get it, especially if you're volunteering and managing a large rain garden. What about sediment buildup? We're doing this to capture water. If you're getting rainwater coming off a hard surface, you may be getting dust and debris, and it's doing its job, but it can end up interfering with the infiltration of the water through the soil into the groundwater. So monitor it regularly, especially after heavy rains. If you do it regularly, you'll have very little sediment. If it starts to build up, to take out with a flat shovel, being careful not to damage the surrounding plants. That can be challenging. You may want to make sure your rain garden again is big enough to manage that. And then you may want to have some rocks or even plants that slow that infiltration of sediment into the rain garden. Now, one of the things, you'll have sediment building up along the edge, and there are certain kind of catch basins that can be used that are a little easier to clean out. This is more typically a problem of gardens by large parking lots than those of you doing rain gardens by sidewalks. But you definitely want to manage the sediment because it can infiltrate the problem. And one of the other things when you're looking at that sediment buildup is soil, is the compost organics coming to the surface from the garden or coming in? And is it interfering with the infiltration? Now, this is something you might do also for your heavy clay soil if it's not working. And that's vertical mulching or core aerating. So we're taking an auger bit on a cordless drill and we're drilling holes. Now, if you need to add compost, you can do it, or even just aerating the soil helps to promote water flow, airflow, and allows for better drainage, especially in heavy soils. When to start over? That's a big question. And that may be something you're looking at your garden going, is there any hope in reclaiming the beauty from this? And where do I even start? And is it possible? In a couple weeks, I'm doing Reinvigorate Your Rain Garden. And what I'm asking, if you feel like you're in this situation, if you can send me a picture of your rain garden, I figure we'll do a little consult here that everyone gets to benefit. We'll show a picture. I won't name names. We've all had messy gardens. Show a picture, and I can talk about, at what point, do you dig up the good stuff, pot it up, keep it on the side, monitor for weeds, pull the weeds? How do you even get started and what do you do? And it's also okay to ask for help. The problem is there aren't a lot of landscape companies that manage rain gardens. So finding someone that has experience installing and maintaining, asked to look at the pictures of the gardens and comments from their customers if you're going to hire someone. So please, info@melindamyers.com. Send me your photos of your problem. I won't mention names, but it'll give us something good to talk about. If I don't get any, I can find problem rain gardens because that's usually what everybody offers me as well. And then I'm going to talk about another webinar on 7 steps on May 15th to managing water on your property. So in addition to rain gardens, I'll talk a little bit about those, but rain barrels, planting trees, amending soil, things, look at it as a holistic system. And that's what we'll talk about then. Because our goal is to create a beautiful and functional rain garden, right? It should be pretty because if it's not pretty, you're not going to want to look at a mess and your neighbors aren't going to either. And so we're going to have to keep them informed. There's a link and on the handout, my upcoming webinars. I'm doing a fun program with the libraries again, not only in Wisconsin and the UP of Michigan, but anyone's welcome to join. We're doing webinars, videos, and activities. So more of that on your handout. And staying connected. Again, send me your pictures, info@melindamyers.com. Help me grow gardeners. Someone inspired you, help someone do the same. And I was going to save these commercials towards the end, but I thought I'd get them in so then we could finish off with any additional questions. But I'm proud to be working with Milwaukee Metro Sewage District and Fresh Coast Guardians because they're trying to do what we can as residents, help keep the water quality good, not only in Lake Michigan, but our other waterways wherever you live. And Fresh Coast Guardians enlists the help of citizens, and the same thing that Milwaukee Metro Sewage District does. Your local municipality, if you're not in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, is probably trying to do the same things, or you can help set the trend and inform your neighbors. I'm going to turn it back to Kelly and to all of you. If there are any questions, maybe related, I might have covered some of them in this talk. It ended up being longer. I told Kelly, oh, this isn't as long as my normal webinar. Sorry, Kelly. I get excited.
No, thank you so much, Melinda. So I want to share a couple housekeeping bits. I have put the link to Melinda's handout in the chat,
Thank you.
as well as the link to MMSD's plant sale. Like Melinda shared, it is
Great.
still open, so check that out. I also put in the link to the Milwaukee Public Library's catalog record for the Gardener's Guide to Prairie Plants.
Thank you.
So absolutely. So if you're in Milwaukee County and you have a library card, you can put a hold on that and have it sent to your neighborhood library. I did see a number of people sharing that they're tuning in from Michigan and Minnesota.
Yay.
Welcome.
Excellent. Great.
Yeah. So please check your local library and see if they have a copy of that as well. Let's see. So let's go down to our Q&A. And please forgive me if I'm mispronouncing your first name. I believe this is Carr. Carr's asking, I have an area where runoff goes during heavy rains. However, it gets quite dry during hot summer months. Would this be an appropriate place to locate a rain garden?
That would be one option. The other thing that I like to do in those situations, if it makes sense from a design and maintenance standpoint, is a dry riverbed. So that you create, and you might put this in the middle of your rain garden or a regular garden or around one. So the idea here is when you've got the heavy rain, you've got, you dig a trench, and that was the picture of my grandson helped me do that um, right off of our, let me see if I can get back there. I'm going to go, oops. So right off of my gutter. So this is my garage. I have a downspout. I have sandy soil, but that garden bed is narrow. And occasionally, just like your situation, I have water buildup. It runs off on the sidewalk. And especially when they're in that season when things are freezing, it makes the sidewalk icy. And I should have had a picture of this finish. So he and I dug this trench. We lined it with landscape fabric, covered it with stone, ran my downspout to that area. Now you're having runoff from some other area, so you have to decide if it's too wide to do this. And then what happens is the water slowly, it comes in, slowly drains through that dry riverbed before it gets to the sidewalk. But then when we don't have rain, it's not a problem because, there's nothing growing in there. Now, I don't know if that would work in your particular situation. If it is more of a larger area and you could put a rain garden in, that's why rain garden plants are so critical, and looking for those that will take it wet and dry so that when you do have that dry period. Now, especially the first couple years, you're probably going to have to do some watering, especially during those dry periods. And so you're going to want to make sure you can monitor that. I'm guessing maybe you have grass growing, if the water collects, but you still can grow grass in the area, it may be putting your rain garden back, it may be, I hate to just say leave your lawn, but that might be an option. But if your grass is surviving the dry period, your rain garden would definitely survive. And adding compost is definitely going to help with drainage and moisture holding during those dry periods. So it sounds like it would work. This might be a good one to send some photos so that we can kind of get a better take on, if I could get a better take on what the layout is. Just be patient with me. Spring is a hard time. I'm outnumbered. But I would kind of look up dry riverbeds, look up French drains, and then kind of look at that area. How big of an area is it that you'd have to manage? And if you've got grass that survives, you're getting enough moisture, maybe you're watering, and that's why your lawn survives. But what's growing there and what's surviving, and that will be a good indication too of what plants would work well in a rain garden in that situation.
Thank you. And just a reminder, if you have any questions, please put those in the Q&A at the bottom of your screen. So we'll next go to Jerry's question. What about foxglove, beard tongue, and wild bergamot? Are they aggressive and are they suitable for rain gardens?
They're very suitable for rain gardens. I almost put foxglove in, especially penstemon, or not foxglove. I'm sorry, I was thinking of penstemon beard's tongue. Foxglove typically is a biennial, and so it sometimes acts like a perennial. I'm just worried about the flooding being an issue. It's a good shade, part shade tolerant plant, foxglove. But being a biennial, now there are rudbeckias that are biennial, but they reseed so readily, they really appear to be perennials. Rudbeckia hirta. But so that'd be my concern about foxglove. Beard's tongue, which I was thinking about, and that I don't know if you said foxglove, beard's tongue, but there is a Penstemon digitalis, our native penstemon, that is more moisture tolerant than most. It'll take wet and dry. It reseeds readily. And so I did not include it just because I don't find it obnoxious, but I have it growing in couple garden beds, and I find seedlings around. So it's just one to watch for seedlings. If it was the penstemon, and I apologize, I should have paid better attention. And the other one was, so it was, oh, bergamot, monarda, bee balm. Is that the other one, Kelly?
Yeah, wild bergamot.
Wild
Mhm.
bergamot. It reseeds ready. It spreads by underground rhizomes and reseeds readily. If you have equally assertive plants, you're probably okay, or if you're willing to thin out seedlings and divide regularly. I've seen too many rain gardens in urban settings where after 3 years, all they have is wild bergamot. And I get it. We all get busy. If you saw my gardens right now, I need to get very busy weeding and things are, so that's why I left wild bergamot off. And I was debating on the penstemon too. Was it foxglove, beard's tongue that he asked about? I'm sorry.
That's right. Yeah, foxglove, beard's tongue, and wild
Okay.
bergamot.
Yeah,
Mhm.
I forget the foxglove, but I do the beard's tongue. It's not that bad, but it does reseed. And the wild bergamot is great. great for pollinators and hummingbirds, but it does reseed readily. And I've seen it take over a lot of gardens. So just be prepared. Actually, it's on the full program we did on how to select rain garden plants. So you'll see it there.
Just an add-on to that question, Melinda, for those folks who might need to thin out any of their returning plants this year, if they're new to dividing plants, what would be the best strategy to do that?
Great question. And then we'll talk a little more, but I'll repeat that again in the reinvigorating because we all learn better when we hear it multiple times and even when we do it. So, a couple things. I think finding the system that works for you. I see all these pictures of people digging out their clump with a garden fork and then doing two garden forks back to back and prying it apart. I have never mastered that. I am not, that's too much coordination for me. What I like to do that works for me is I take a shovel, a good sharp shovel, dig around that clump and lift it out, and then I'll take for easy to divide plants like a linoleum knife or a drywall saw and cut it. If it's one with a thick fleshy root system, I get out my reciprocating saw because you can get different lengths of blades and you got the power of that battery behind you to cut through. I've had to use it on some grasses and some willow amsonia and some others where the saws didn't work and it was like, I got to get this. So dig out the clump and just take the whole clump out. Sometimes the center is dead. Throw that in the compost pile. Divide it into 4 or 8 sections. The bigger the division, the sooner it's going to fill in. And then maybe the sooner you're going to need to divide it again. The smaller will take a little longer. Now, if it's a huge plant, you're just trying to reduce the size, you can just take your sharp shovel and take off the outer portions of it. Now, making sure you're not leaving that dead center intact, but sometimes taking your sharp shovel and working from the outside works. For me, I find it works best if I can dig up that clump. Some things with a taproot, you're going to need to get underneath. I've used a lopper sometimes to cut through the taproot, trying to get as much of it as you can. Doing it when the soil's moist but not soggy wet because you can lift it better. If it's dry, especially if you have clay soil and it's hard and it's bone dry, it's going to be hard to get it out of the soil. So moist, but moist, just slightly moist, not wet. And that makes it a little easier. Dividing on a cloudy day, your plants will be less stressed. Dividing when they're just emerging from the ground, I find easier. But if you want to enjoy the spring blooms, you might do it at the end of summer. And a lot of times with the hot, dry summers we've had recently, doing at the end of summer, fall tends to have warm soil, cool air, so it's easier for the plants to reestablish. And so that might be another time you could do it. But what I find gardeners is they do it when you have time. So here's the deal. The more you dig and divide, the easier it becomes. And try to do it on a video. You look like an idiot. Trust me, I did. That's when I started with the shovel. I got out the saw. We got out the sawzall, and I was like, well, that was a dumb plant to pick. So it just takes practice finding the tools that work for the way you garden. There's a lot of ways to accomplish things. So I'm glad you asked that question. And I did a video for dividing for MMSD, but also for another client. So we'll use some of that. I'm making a note. We'll include that in the reinvigorate because I do think seeing it done might help too. Dividing. Okay. Sorry, make a note so I don't forget. Good question. Thanks,
Thank you
Kelly.
so much, for sure. All right, so I'm just hopping over to the chat. I saw a question from Linda. Linda's asking what to do with an out of control rain garden, overgrown and weeds. We did have an answer from Jeff. Jeff helpfully shared that I like to use gypsum for natural weed control on the lawn. With gypsum and Milorganite, my lawn looks pretty good all summer long.
Okay, one of the things gypsum is often used for is to help manage clay and clay because it improves drainage. Now it works well in areas where you have a high salt index. Um, so thank you, Jeff, for sharing that. Linda, I did get your question, and that was kind of my shout out to you at the end about an overgrown garden. And so this would be one, if you have pictures, I'd love to take a closer look at it. Um, I have to say, I have to give a shout out to DNR and MMSD because one of the questions, Chuck, I won't use your last name, he volunteers to manage a large rain garden by a public library, and they were having huge sediment issues, and it was way beyond my talents. And so um, the folks at MMSD were very helpful in helping him because it wasn't it was a large scale in a very public area, not your typical home garden, and DNR giving me some advice on managing those cattails. And so seeing the pictures, when I saw the picture of the garden he was managing, I'm like, wow, very different than what most of you are going to be dealing with. So if you could send that picture. So Linda, this is where I think doing an inventory, and I think if I remember right, you inherited this garden and so you weren't sure what you had, so you let things grow, and there's probably some weeds in there as well as the good plants. And if you can get a hold of that prairie book so that you can start identifying things as they come up. Michigan, we have somebody from Michigan. They have some great, Michigan State University has some good weed ID information. I think it's Michigan State University on their website that shows weed seedlings so you can start to get familiar with it. I really hope that someday we'll have more demonstration rain gardens with labels and more information. And maybe that's something I need to work on, getting some of those seedling pictures so that we can help you do it. So I think what I would say this year is if you can track that garden, maybe if you can find some help, again, you might want to look for um, I would go to findalandscaper.org if you're in the Milwaukee metro area. If you're in another area, do look for your local landscape contractors. Not all of them are good at rain garden. They all have specialties, so it's not a slam on them. It's like they have different specialties. And then you may be doing a search for rain garden consultants and see if you can get someone in to come and walk that garden with you to say, keep it, get rid of it, keep it, get rid of it. Some master gardeners may be able to help. You might want to contact your extension service and see if there are any master gardeners that have some expertise in the area and could come and help you. Okay, you've got 50% are good plants, the rest are weeds. That's kind of the point where you decide, do I dig up the good ones, pot them up, monitor for weeds, and then start over, which would be maybe using a total herbicide, which I know none of us want to do to kill out the weeds. Do that a couple of times, try to manage them. Or it could be a mowing and cultivating for a season to get those weeds under control if you don't want to use the chemicals. Otherwise, it's digging them out and getting them out of there so that your good plants have a chance to take over. It's so easy. One of my missions is to help you be successful and help all of us avoid those problems. It is maintenance. I think if I remember, Linda, your email, your question, you inherited this beautiful garden from somebody and they had kind of aged out of caring for it and you wanted to continue that. And so I give you credit for not just mowing it over and calling it quits. So trying to find those other resources. If you have some pictures, send them to me at info@melindamyers.com and let me see and then tell me where you're located too. That helps me a lot. I'm lucky to work with gardeners all over the country and opportunities in plant material are different depending on where you garden. And so that would help me too, try to help you.
And Linda shared in the chat. I'll be happy to send you pictures and hopefully I'll find the plant list too.
Oh, that would be great. That would be very helpful. And I'm glad I work with a lot of gardeners who inherit gardens when they buy the house. And if you have a beautiful garden, leave a list or some pictures if you want it to be carried on. Because I know I talk to people who get frustrated and then they feel bad and then they just destroy the garden. So thank you, Linda. That would be very helpful.
Got a follow-up from Jeff. Jeff says, regarding my gypsum suggestion, I'm near the east shore of Lake Michigan and my soil is like beach and beach sand with some dirt mixed in. MSU is the ag school in Michigan and has extension offices around the state.
Right.
So,
Yes. Thank you so much for
mhm.
sharing that, Jeff. And they are great. It's an excellent, we
Mhm.
have some wonderful land grant schools that, I go to a lot of the different states to get information. I was just in Michigan working in Detroit and met some great gardeners. And they have a beautiful, if you're in the Detroit area, I got to do a shout out for them. They have an Udolph garden. He's a famous designer, and that's on Bell Point, Bell Vista, in anyway, in Detroit, and they have a beautiful, huge rain garden. And I attended one of their workshops. I'm going to put links into their website in my next upcoming newsletter. And their webinar, it was just great. He showed pictures of this garden throughout the year. It was just, I was like just watching artwork in front of me on my computer screen. So yeah, there's some cool stuff happening. Minnesota's doing a lot there. Minnesota Landscape Arboretum, I've got to get up there and get some pictures of the rain garden exhibit they have at the University of Minnesota Landscape Arboretum just west of the Twin Cities. And so that's another great place so for those of you in those areas, and they have a good extension service with great information as well.
So going down the chat here, Patricia is asking, who do you recommend on Milwaukee's south side to aerate a lawn? I'm 2 miles west of our airport and south of where you lived.
So one, make sure aeration is needed. Okay. So especially in your lawn, aeration is great for compacted soil. For thatch buildup, I find it's helpful because it opens it up so the thatch has a better chance to break down. But dethatching your lawn, if it's over a half an inch or less of thatch is a good thing. I know on the south side of Milwaukee, clay soil is an issue. And we had gardens, rental gardens. I used to, when I worked for Extension, by the airport. So I know that soil is pretty challenging. Um, I I don't know who's doing soil aeration. You want to make sure the soil is moist, not wet, because if it's hard, bone dry, that the core aerator won't go in. Also, if you can find someone that will break up the cores, there are some people will drag a piece of chain link fence, some will grind them up, and that allows them to improve the soil because they break down quickly as opposed to looking like goose poop all over your lawn. I would say go to findalandscaper.org. I do not know who's doing aeration right now, and that way you could maybe find someone in your area, maybe at your garden center. So I know Blumels is there. Not that they would do it, but they may work with some landscape companies and know people in the area. If there's anyone else on this, and then there's Plant Land, I think it is by the airport, that garden center. Again, they probably wouldn't do it, but they may work with landscape companies and be able to give you some insight. So I would say that. And if there's anyone online that's on the south side of Milwaukee that is happy with a lawn care provider, please share with her.
Thanks, Wanda. So our next question is from Lynn. Lynn's wondering, can I start dividing, moving, and planting plants now in southeastern Wisconsin?
I was just looking through my garden. It's amazing what's coming up already. If they're already starting to pop out of the ground, yes, that's a great time to dig and divide. I'm a little bit away from the lake, and so I always get those late season frosts. But if it's already started to pop through the soil, this is a good time when they're small and it's easier to divide. If you're guessing where they're located, I would give them some time to sprout, put on some growth. That means they need it a little bit warmer. We've had such crazy weather everywhere, right? Cold followed by warm. It gets down in the 20s, then it's up in the 60s during the day and back and forth. And so if the soil's workable, the plants are starting to sprout. Yes, you can dig and divide. Keep in mind, if it's a spring bloomer, you may eliminate or limit the flowering, but if it's overgrown, you might say, "Ah, I'll sacrifice the flowers." One garden maintenance person told me she divides right after her spring flowers bloom and has good success. So she gets the spring bloom, she gets them in, they have all summer to get established. My only concern is we've had such hot, dry summers the last few years. Last year, heavy rain early in the season, then dry August through fall here in southern Wisconsin. And I know it varies across the country. So kind of keeping in mind, can you water? Because once you dig and divide them, it's like starting with a transplant again. The root system's smaller, you've got to get it established. So good question.
Just to repeat, your email is info@melindamyers.com. So
And
if
if
anyone,
I don't answer you right away, email again. Diana, who works with me, will go get on board with this. So she'll nudge me. So please be patient with me. But again, if it's on reinvigorating your rain garden, I want to answer those in that piece. Many will benefit. And even if you can't join me live, you could watch the recording on the public library YouTube channel.
right, yeah, and we are recording this session as well, so we'll send out the link to that. And the Milwaukee Public Library YouTube channel has a backlog of all of our workshops with Melinda, so you can go back and watch things that maybe you missed, and then look forward to new recordings as we add them in. So I've got a question from Barb. Barb says, I'm looking to hire a rain barrel specialist for my business. Any suggestions about a good one?
Interesting. A rain barrel specialist. So I'm going to put, don't answer this if you don't want to. I wish I could do a little side, Kelly. The people that designed the rain garden for the library, was it Merrick? No.
Yes. So for those of you in the Milwaukee area, if you've been to the Tippecanoe Branch Library, we had a green infrastructure makeover and reopened in 2017. So yeah, Merrick Landscaping, that's a local Milwaukee landscape company. They did a big part of that along with MMSD, but yeah, Merrick did the planting. So they're definitely a local specialist in native landscaping.
And you might see what their deal is with rain barrels. You might want to email Fresh Coast Guardians. If you're in the Milwaukee metro area, that might be a place to also get some insight. And especially if it's a large business, it's a large building. The other thing, MMSD would be a great place because they work with businesses on green infrastructure. So if you're in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, and that's just not just Milwaukee County, but along the lakefront and their service areas on their website, um, they work with businesses on green infrastructure. So that would be a great place to start too. So I would start there. If you are not in the Milwaukee Metro Sewage District, they may be able to direct you to whoever's in your area that could help as well. But they really are doing a lot of things with businesses on green roofs, water management, rain gardens, and all kinds of things. So I would start with Milwaukee Metro Sewage District. If you're not getting to somebody you need to, let me know where you are and let me try to help you navigate to see if I can find somebody to help you. Because right off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody that specializes in rain barrels for a business other than MMSD, who works with large, they did work with several different companies, Summerfest grounds. I don't know if they worked with the museum. They've done a couple of other worked with a couple other bigger buildings and helping them manage their stormwater because that helps all of us. So, Barb, that's a thank you for wanting to tackle that for your business. So, info at Melinda Myers, but check with Milwaukee Metro Sewage District. There is a place to contact them. If not, Fresh Coast Guardians could get you in touch with the right people at the district. But if that all fails, then info at melindamyers.com.
Shared some clarification. She says, I'm looking to hire for my landscaping business.
Oh, for her late. Oh, okay.
Mm.
I see. So
Yeah.
you can include the rain barrels. Oh, I got it. I would start with Fresh Coast Guardians because
Mhm.
they were doing training they were working with a youth corps program. And then they also hire some summer help and interns Okay, I would call Fresh Coast Guardian. I would definitely email them because they've trained people. If you're in the Milwaukee metro area, they've trained people on rain barrel installation, rain garden installation, and they may have some people that are looking to do this. The goal was to help train people to get jobs and do this kind of work. So I would do that with Fresh Coast Guardians because I know they've got people they've trained to do exactly this. Thank you for clarifying that. I made the big assumption. So
Some more helpful information from Jeff. Jeff says in the Madison area, beautifullawnsmadison.com does core aeration, and they recently became a member of MABA. So going back to our question about aerating lawns, if you're in the Madison area, that's something to check
thank
out.
you. And there used to be an organic, an eco-friendly, there is a turf association too, turf grass association, but those are the growers as well as the people that install. So thank you, Jeff. I find gardeners are great at giving us that, hey, this worked for me. They've got a good reputation. So thank you.
So it looks like that is all the questions we have for this evening.
And what I will be doing too is if you have follow-up, as we mentioned, we'll include some of that in the reinvigorating. A lot of times I will do, you know, you can get a hold of me, but I'll share this at the next rain garden webinar we're doing. And if it's specific, just something very unique to you, info@melindamyers.com. And I may share it on Facebook or in a newsletter or back with Kelly so that we could get it out to more people to benefit everybody. I just want to thank everyone for joining us. It's great that you took the time. Those of you that submitted questions in advance, those of you if I didn't fully answer. So Linda, thanks for getting me some pictures so I could help you out. And hopefully we can help all of you grow beautiful and functioning rain gardens as well. So thank you for all your time, your questions, and keep working on it. We all need some beautiful rain gardens and we can help each other be successful.
Thanks, everyone. We will follow up with the recording as well as a link to Melinda's handout, and then the other links that we shared in the chat this evening. And then if you have any other questions for Melinda, like she shared, send that to info@melindamyers.com, and check out more great webinar workshops from Melinda this spring and summer, hosted by Milwaukee Public Library. And thank you all so much for spending your evenings with us.
Take care.
Bye now.